Hello everyone, this video lecture is entitled Gender, Culture, and Human Rights, and the content for this lecture is sourced from the United Nations Population Fund. Here are the topics that are going to be covered in this lecture. The first one is the integration of culture, gender, and human rights, and we're also going to talk about human rights-based approaches in terms of interventions. And then we're going to look into the basic concepts of human rights. We're going to also look at the nature of state obligations and how do we ensure accountability. So it is important to note that when we are championing for human rights and when we do advocacies related to human rights or in alleviation of humans from their suffering and their oppression, we have to always remember that culture, gender, and human rights are interlinked. International human rights are universally recognized, but their practical implementation requires a clear sense of the interplay between gender, culture, and human rights. The effective application of a human rights-based approach within a development process that is sensitive to both cultural factors and gender dynamics will advance equality and social inclusion and will contribute to the alleviation of poverty and the realization of all related human rights as we engage and implement our advocacies. And because human rights approach aims to promote and protect rights, reduce inequality, and harness substantive participation of those who are most affected, it is by definition sensitive to issues of culture and gender. These three factors of cultural sensitivity, gender responsiveness, and human rights lie at the foundation of effective programs and policies that aim to promote equality in all levels. They are intricately linked and directly reinforce one another. So, in our previous lectures, we talked about how we should fight against and advocate against any form of discrimination based on gender, based on sexual orientation, based on gender identities, based on all the whole spectrum of SOGI, based on racial and ethnic background, based on class, based on ability, based on age, based on nationality, and other forms of social categorizations. And we were also exposed in terms of the ways that we are gearing towards that, by promoting multiculturalism, by promoting gender equal policies and procedures and programs in various sectors such as at home, in schools, in workplaces, through laws that we have from a local and a national level. We also talked about the movements that have fought for and advocated for equality, such as feminism, LGBTQIA activism, and other forms of social movements that aim to promote protection and increasing representation for people who are part of the margins. Now, in the field of human and social development, in terms of planning and implementing programs and policies to promote these types of developments, we are gearing towards what we call a human rights-based approach. A culturally sensitive, gender-responsive, and human rights-based approach, or HRBA, has replaced the basic needs approach that we used to follow in terms of promoting human and social development at the community, organizational, and institutional, and national level. So in this table, we see the difference between the basic needs and sustainable livelihood approach, which was used as a perspective in terms of empowering people before, and we have now human rights-based approaches. So ano yung difference nung dalawa? Now we call the actors in human rights-based approaches as rights holders and duty bearers, where before we called everyone as stakeholders. The term stakeholder refers to anyone that has an interest in a project, program, or policy and can influence its success. And basically, in the basic needs approach, we wanted the people who are going to be the recipient of the program and the policies to be included in the table of decision making. While that's good, it doesn't really address much of the power dynamics that happen between those who are oppressed and those who are from the host culture or from the dominant groups. In HRBA, we call the actors as rights holders and duty bearers. The rights holders are the people of the state, and the duty bearers are the state and the dominant groups that are attached to the state for it to be able to function. In the needs-based approach, needs are met through charity and benevolence of people, wherein people are just passive, receivers of care and receiver of help, and they don't really have empowerment at the end of the program. However, for HRBA, development is entitlement, meaning I, as a member of the state, as a human being, granted with rights by the virtue of being a human living being, I am entitled to all forms of development that will make me experience the highest quality of life possible. And it is the duty of the state to provide me with that. And advocacies should run that narrative in an HRBA approach. It's not something that, hey, I need this, that's why you have to provide this to me. It's really more of, no, I am entitled to my right to life, to my right to freedom, to my right to freedom of expression, to my right to health care, for me to be able to have an enriched quality of life, for me to become economically productive, to become a good citizen of this country. And the state is bound to provide that to me, especially that I am paying taxes to my to the government. In the needs approach for development, power relations are not taken into account, or if they are taken into account, medyo hindi masyadong focused in that specific area. It's really more of satisfaction of the needs of the people who are not able to get the basic needs that they have in life. Yes, there are areas in order to make people more self-reliant, to make them more capacitated, to make them more empowered, but it's not as focused and not as the core of the implementation of projects as the human rights-based approach, which really provides a framework for the analysis of power and authority, and offering counter narratives and challenging the authority of people, and increasing the sense of entitlement of people, so that instead of them asking for needs, it's them reminding themselves that they're entitled to the fulfillment of the rights that they have as being human beings. In the needs-based approach, the ultimate goal is that needs are met and satisfied. As long as you survive, as long as buhay ka and you're able to become economically productive, it's okay na. But for human rights-based approaches, it is the rights that are realized, respected, protected, and fulfilled that is the end game. No, it's not just enough that you receive food, or you receive livelihood, you receive capacities for you to be able to move, but also to have all your other rights and your humanity and integrity maintained and respected and realized at the end of all these programs and advocacies. For needs-based approaches, it is seen through outcomes, but for human rights-based approaches, attention is paid for both the outcomes of whatever advocacy or program or policy is created, but also looks into the process, because across the process of being able to realize your rights is also increasing empowerment for the people who are engaged on it, especially those who are from the margins. So in summary, the central elements of HRBA are that all programs of development, cooperation, policies, and technical assistance have to further the realization of human rights, including all the advocacies, community outreach work, and the likes. And that All sectors of programming and development cooperation have to be guided by human rights principles such as universality, indivisibility, equality, and non-discrimination, participation and inclusion, which is something that is not much dwelled into in the previous approaches, and accountability of the duty bearers of the human rights. We'll discuss these specific principles later. And finally, in a human rights-based approach, human rights help to frame the relationship between individuals and groups with claims or your right holders and state and non-state actors with corresponding obligation or responsibilities, and they are your duty bearers. State actors refers to the government, while non-state actors refer to like health service providers, parents, religious leaders, tribal elders, private sector companies, and others that have obligations to various rights holders that are under them. A human rights-based approach to development programs, to advocacies, to activism is powerful because it emphasizes the fact that governments are the primary duty bearers under a human rights framework. As a result, they have obligations to put in place equitable laws and systems that enable individuals to enjoy their rights and to seek judicial recourse under the rule of law when they have been violated. By contrast, as rights holders, people can claim those rights that are recognized as legitimate entitlements. This approach emphasizes the empowerment of those who are affected by policies, tayo yon, the people, and their participation in the decision-making process. Tayo ulit yon, the people. And this type of human rights-based approach is being assumed and being used by different advocacy groups. No? I know specifically Metro Manila Pride is their development is really based on a human rights based approach because I'm a part of it. And when I was being inducted into the one of the committees of Metro Manila Pride, they really emphasized that if human rights is not the base of the core of whatever programs we are developing in LGBTQIA activism and in improving the lives of our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters, then what's the point? No? So yun yung kanilang kind of core belief. So if the aims of HRBA are to protect and promote rights, reduce inequality, and harness the substantive participation of those who are most affected, then by definition, HRBA is sensitive to the issues of culture and gender, and these are social categories wherein we can see experiences of inequality. Women, trans women, members of the LGBTQIA community, trans individuals, and then in terms of culture, those who are affected by racial discrimination, ethnic discrimination, indigenous peoples. So at the end of the day, when you really look at it, in order for you to be able to achieve, the realization of human rights, the policies, the programs, the advocacies, and the activism that comes with, fighting for these rights must be gender sensitive and culture sensitive. In one of its reports, the United Nations Population Fund, or the UNFPA, gives some success stories in terms of human rights-based approach in terms of achieving sexual and reproductive health. For instance, in one country in South Asia, UNFPA is supporting the government and other partners in developing the capacities of women and girls in poor communities. And we remember that kahit sila ay mahirap, kahit sila ay nasa rural areas, they are still rights holders for being members of the states. So they are being capacitated to better articulate their claims with respect to their right to health. This program includes training sessions to emphasize the rights in sexual and reproductive health to information and to freedom from discrimination. Through this program, the UNFPA is promoting the principles of participation by engaging the women and girls by making them learn about their rights, their sexual rights, their rights to information and freedom from discrimination, and inclusion of marginalized groups in an effort to ensure that human rights based population is applied. So, ganun siya. And that's the reason why your output is advocacy campaign, is consciousness raising. Because you want the people who are victims or who are suffering from these systems of oppressions to know what are their rights and that they shouldn't be discriminated, so that they will be empowered to know how to be able to advocate for their own rights as well, together with you, of course. So as explained earlier, in terms of fighting for or advocating for human rights, our programs and our policies and advocacy should be culturally sensitive. While not passing judgment on any tradition, culture, or religion, we should recognize that cultural values are not static. We are aware that culture can change, and even within one point in their time, interpretation within every one culture may vary significantly. A culturally sensitive approach to programming that may be used in diverse and complex cultural contexts may be present. The culturally sensitive approach ensures that we can locate within every cultural context the methods, conditions, and language that are favorable to human rights. So, in trying to advocate for cultures who are in the minorities, when we try to create programs and policies to improve their social well-being, the culturally sensitive approach includes respecting their cultures, honoring our commitments with them, and promoting universally recognized human rights in ways that enable communities to own these rights and use them within their own contexts. So in order for us to be able to uplift the situation of people at the margins, it's important that we also transform cultural traditions from within by using society's own dynamics and practices of change. As the executive director of UNFPA, Thoraya Ubaid, says, the only way for the human rights content to be universalized is to allow it to be articulated by the people themselves and through their own contexts of suffering and understanding. Only when people take action to respond to their immediate needs or to a violation of some aspects of their lives can they move to a higher level of conceptualizing the principles of human rights. And also, therefore, with this in mind, it's important that we also engage social leadership rather than just attempt to dispense with it completely. So, if we develop programs, we develop advocacies, we develop it with the people, and if possible, we put them forefront in terms of advocating this, Of course, it's important for us to be able to make use of our privilege to speak for others. But if they could, we allow them to speak for themselves also while we rally behind them. So by adopting culturally sensitive approaches to promote human rights standards and principles, we should not make value judgments on any cultural values held by communities or groups. Rather, it is addressing harmful practices that represent violations of international standards of human rights. For example, campaigning to end female genital mutilation or cutting is not a value judgment on any culture whether the practice is being exercised, but it is a judgment that the practice denies the right to freedom from discrimination on the basis of gender and to the right of health. So we do not attack the culture where that practice emerged, but we kind of address it as a universally available protection for all females. A human rights perspective affirms that the rights of women and girls to freedom from discrimination and to the highest standard of health are universal, and cultural claims cannot be invoked to justify their violation. So there is sort of a limitation to cultural relativism when we are doing human rights-based approach. But at the same time, if the cultural practices and the cultural expressions are are parallel with or not off tangent from what is being advocated by or fulfilled by the rights or universal human rights, then we allow the expression of rights within the context of the culture. UNFPA also gives another example of a culturally sensitive mainstreaming program for that is based on human rights based approach. For example, we know that in most Southeast Asian countries, there are more people who are affiliated with Buddhism, and Buddhist values of moderation, self-discipline, and compassion have been tapped into the fight of HIV and AIDS in these countries. The temple is often the heart of the community, the place where people go to seek spiritual guidance and support. Aware of the role performed by Buddhists and lay clergy within local communities, many organizations that are related to HIV and AIDS advocacy have taken the opportunity to use the revered status of Buddhist clergy to help promote and demonstrate messages of compassion and care, and to raise awareness on sensitive issues regarding sexual health. In one country, supported by the UNFPA Reproductive Health Initiative Youth for Asia, monks were trained to promote messages on safe sex to adolescents at risk of STIs and HIV and unwanted pregnancies. In addition, these monks contributed to the elimination of the stigma associated with HIV and AIDS by providing accurate information on HIV and AIDS transmission and prevention, and emphasizing compassion for those already affected. And in the Philippines also, there's a lot of cultural and religious mainstreaming in the way we do messages for HIV and AIDS. There are actually parishes who champion HIV and AIDS. And because, as we all know, in the Philippines, Catholicism is a very closely knit value that we have as Filipinos, then we make use of their expressive leadership, no, the expressive leadership of our priests and nuns in order to get the message out against the stigma on HIV and AIDS. So that's an example of culturally sensitive programming in terms of improving our awareness about sexual and reproductive health. And also, as explained, aside from culturally sensitive programming, our human rights-based approaches towards advocacy and programs must also be gender responsive. And we also have to make sure that in all the policies and programs and activities and advocacies we do, we perform what we call gender mainstreaming. So what is gender mainstreaming? Mainstreaming a gender perspective is the process of assessing the implications for women and men of any planned action, including legislation, policies, or programs in any areas at all levels. It is a strategy for making women's as well as men's concerns and experiences an integral dimension in the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and programs in all political, economic, and societal spheres, so that women and men, and of course other SOGI, benefit equally and inequality is not perpetuated. The ultimate goal is to achieve gender equality. Gender mainstreaming is something that is required in public agencies, no, sa kanilang gender and development trainings and programs. So, gender-responsive programming requires understanding of causes of discrimination and unequal power relations between men and women in specific contexts. And that given eliminating all forms of discrimination are at the heart of HRBA, HRBA and gender-responsive approaches are inextricably related and should be integrated. So in the future, even outside your multi-gen classes, if you want to do advocacy works, if you want to do programs that develop people who are in the margins, you have to understand that if you want this to be effective, if you want people coming out of the program as more empowered, with better self-consciousness, gender mainstreaming, even if it's not the main thing about the program, must be applied. And so we reiterate again that human rights-based approach, culturally sensitive approaches, and gender-responsive approaches are very much interconnected. And in doing any advocacies, they should all be found. In doing programs that will lift people up out of their oppression and their marginalization, these three should be taken into account. Whether that's about sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, whether it's about women's empowerment, SOGI empowerment, HIV prevention, violence against women, safe motherhood in emergency situations, trans rights, LGBTQIA rights, and anti-LGBTQIA discrimination movements, whether it's about issues on racism, ethnic discrimination, police brutality, IP rights, whether or not your advocacy is gearing towards a specific activity or a specific output that's not necessarily directly related to gender and cultural emancipation, we also have to still think about this, in the sides and parallel to these issues that we're trying to target in our programs and activities. So before we delve further into the human rights-based approaches, let's remember and recall the basic concepts of human rights. So what are human rights? So human rights are intrinsic values that give all human beings dignity. As stated in the very first line of the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the UDHR, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and alienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So, what are the characteristics of human rights? First, human rights are universal and the birthright of all human beings. So, once you are born in this world, you are entitled to all of these rights. Focus on the inherent dignity and equal worth of all human beings. So whether you're a woman, you're a man, you're an LGBTQIA, you are poor, you're rich, you are from an IP community, you are from an urban, rural community, whether you're regardless of your race and ethnic background, regardless of your age, you are entitled to human rights. And it cannot be waived or taken away, except of course when you are incarcerated, you are in conflict with the law, but in other ways it cannot be waived from you. And it imposes obligations on the state and non-state actors to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. Remember that being human beings, we are rights holders, and the state and non-state actors, the institutions, they are also duty bearers that must respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. These are supposedly internationally guaranteed and protected and must be legally protected, must be seen in our basic constitutions in our states. So there are 26 articles of the Universal Declaration of Rights, and I will be discussing each one to you. So the first one is about being free and equal, which says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. The next is about freedom from discrimination. So everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms that are set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other forms of status. The third one is the right to life. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. The next is freedom from slavery. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and slave trade shall be prohibited in all forms. The fifth one is torture. No one shall be subjective to torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment. So probably by now you're imagining the things that have been happening in our country, and you're thinking about how many human rights have not been observed or realized by some of the people who are experiencing some of the cruelties, in the world, and how some people's lives have been taken away without due process. Next, number 6 is the right recognition before the law. So everyone has the right for access to the law. And then number 7, right to equality before the law. So all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. So, in short, what we expect is that when we are facing charges, we must be treated as the same as someone who have more power as us in terms of our legal destinies, our judicial destinies for whatever case that we are charged with. Number 8 is the access to justice. Everyone has the right to an effective remedy by competent national tribunal for acts violating the fundamental rights granted to him by the law. Next, we have freedom from arbitrary detention. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile without, of course, a warrant, without an arrest warrant. So when we say detention, that should be more than 24 hours. And that is one of the things na pinaglalaban ng Pride 20, if you remember. Then they were detained without an arrest warrant for more than 24 hours, and now they're pushing back. They have charged against the Metro Manila Police, the Manila Police Department. Next is the right to fair trial. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in determination of rights and obligation of any criminal charge against them. So, again, looking back at some of the stories that we've had in the past few years, here in the Philippines and elsewhere, about how seemingly some people who are members of the power elite are easily getting away from their accountabilities with the law, and those and some others do not even have good access to good public representation, to good public attorneys. Some people don't even have also the same compassion as those people who are in power, who are provided with compassion when they're committing crimes. So next we have number 11, presumption of innocence. Everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty according to the law in a public trial at which they have had all the guarantees necessary for the defense. And of course, as we all know in the stories that we have observed in the past years, we know that this has not been true, or this has not been observed in many instances. Next is the right to privacy. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with their privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon their honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law, such as interference or attacks. Next, we have freedom of movement. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state, and everyone has the right to leave any country, including their own, and return to their own country. Of course, looking into the laws within and outside the country, and unless there are laws that prohibit that person from doing so. Next, the right to asylum. Everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. So we're talking about refugees here. And then number 15, right to nationality. Everyone has the right to a nationality. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of their nationality and nor denied the right to change their nationality if they apply for it. Next, right to marriage and to found a family. So everyone, a man or a woman of full age without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion, have the right to marry and found a family. They are entitled with equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. And then marriage shall be entered into only with free and full consent of the intending spouses. That's why there are issues about child marriages, why it's not adherent to the Declaration of Rights. Now you know why. Next, number 17, right to own property. Everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. And no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of their property without due process. Next, freedom of religion or belief. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change their religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, in public or private, to manifest their religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Next, we have freedom of expression. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Next, freedom of assembly. Everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. And also, no one may be compelled to belong to an association if they don't like. Next, right to partake in public affairs. Everyone has a right to take part in government of their country directly or through freely chosen representatives. Everyone has the right to equal access to public service in their country. And then the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of the government. And this will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures. That's why democracy is very important, because it's closely linked to the realization of human rights. Next, we have right to social security. Everyone as a member of society has the right to social security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for their dignity and the free development of their personality. Next is the right to work and the free choice of employment, and to be exposed to just and favorable conditions of work and protection against unemployment. Everyone without discrimination has the right to equal pay for equal work. That's why we also look into how we can equalize gender-based pay. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable compensation, ensuring themselves and their family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection, like for example, medical insurances, social insurances, retirement benefits, etc. Everyone has the right to form and join trade unions. So yung mga pagbuo ng union, it is part of our human rights. Next, right to leisure and rest. Everyone has a right to rest and leisure, including the reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. That's why you should have works in between, and you should have leaves with pay. And then we have right to adequate standard of living. Everyone has the right to standard of living adequate for health and well-being of themselves and their family, including food, clothing, housing, and other medical care necessary. And to the right of security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood and in circumstances beyond their control. And that's the reason why we are looking for universal health care, because it's a right for us to have that kind of security as well. And that's why we need to have good housing programs for those who cannot afford their housing, because we are entitled to it. Next, we have right to good education. Education that's free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all based on merit. And then also, parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children, whether that's private school, public school, Catholic school, unschooling, homeschooling, parents have that right, and the government cannot dictate that. 27, right to take part in cultural, artistic, and scientific life. Everyone has the right to freely participate in cultural life of the community, enjoy in the arts, and share in scientific advancement and its benefits. Everyone has the right to protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which they are the author. So, pumapasok din dito yung intellectual property rights and our creative rights. And then Article 28, right to a free and fair world. No, everyone is entitled to a social and international order free from conflict in which the rights and freedoms set forth by this declaration can be fully realized. The additional articles say that we have a duty to our community. In the exercise of their rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as determined by law, solely for the purpose of securing due to recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. That's why we can always, people who say na, no, I don't want to wear my mask, it's my right to not wear a mask and decide for my own health. But again, looking at Article number 29, I mean, yes, these are universal, but this can be regulated if public order is at stake. If the general welfare and public health is at stake, the government can intervene and regulate these types of rights, because we, in a democratic fashion, no, we want to make sure that everybody receives a better quality of life, so that they'll be able to eventually enjoy these rights further. Kasi, di ba, if people are dead from corona, from COVID-19, how else are you going to enjoy these rights that you are entitled to? That's why the government can regulate that. Kahit yan ay right mo. And that rights are inalienable. They are universal. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedom set forth herein. So they are indivisible. They cannot be discriminated against. It's for everyone, unless it's regulated by the government because of a general welfare issue. And in the context of gender and multiculturalism, we have to also make sure that the enjoyment of these rights must be equally enjoyed by women, equally enjoyed based on sexual diversity, enjoyed by sexual minorities, minorities because of their gender identities, by queer people, that these human rights are also enjoyed by people from religions that are not dominant in their host countries, by racial groups that are not dominant in their host countries, by ethnic minorities, by indigenous peoples, regardless of that. And that's why when we talk about human rights-based approaches, we go back to the first few articles which say that this the enjoyment and the realization and the entitlement to these rights must be applied indiscriminately to people. Of course, indiscriminately doesn't mean that we give the same attention, because again, when we look at it from that perspective, then we just give the same piece of the pie. It's really more of providing the needs of people based on the needs that they have, and at the same time also providing them with abilities and opportunities to be able to enjoy these rights by fighting with them and making the state and non-state actors accountable for people to have an indiscriminated way of fulfilling or enjoying these rights. And we also explained earlier that all of us, the population, we are rights holders, and the state are duty bearers. Rights owners is that we can ask for this. We are entitled to this. We have to enjoy these things. And as duty bearers, the state and other non-state actors are obliged to and are required to protect these rights. Are required to make programs, procedures, policies, systems, and structures in such a way that we get to enjoy all of these rights, regardless of our background or social category, our cultural and our gender category, etc. And the obligation of the duty bearers, which is of course your state and non-state actors, is to respect, protect, and fulfill those rights. So respecting meaning refraining from interfering with the enjoyment of right. But of course, when you think about, the things that are happening, in the past few years, freedom of speech pa lang, right? Freedom to have work and a good working environment pa lang. It feels like different state and non-state actors have set up structures for us to be able to equally, enjoy these rights. And that's the reason why we have to do HRBA programs, from individual, collective, and international levels. We have to watch these things happening. That's why we have a CHR, a Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines, because we have to look into the actions of state and non-state actors in terms of what are they doing and the procedures and policies that they're putting up that may potentially decrease our entitlement to those rights. The second one is to protect, prevent others from interfering with the enjoyment of the right. So that's why we are, if we know that someone is a murderer, someone has committed homicide, someone has committed a massacre, we try that person, and when we prove that person guilty, we put that person in jail so that that person will not be able to, interfere with the people's right to life, right? And that's why there are laws in terms of anti-discrimination laws, so that other actors, private and public actors, will not be doing discrimination based on work. That's why we have Magna Carta for women. That's why we have VAUSI laws, because we want to prevent others like individual and collective actors to interfere with the rights of people. And then fulfill, adopt appropriate measure towards full realization of the rights. And that's the reason why we should have policies that, for example, SOGI discrimination, anti-discrimination bill, because we want people to enjoy their rights regardless of their SOGI. That's why we have age anti-discrimination bill, because we want people to enjoy the rights despite not discriminating based on the age of the person. That's why we have the IP law. That's why we have the Magna Carta for women. That's the reason why we have the PWD law, the Persons with Disability law, because we want people to have full realizations and full enjoyment of the rights that are given to them. Because if your humanness does not decrease when you are given a vulnerable social identity such as a disability, too young, too old, poor, a queer, because these are social identities that disadvantage you, and the goal of the state and non-state actors is to be able to capacitate you despite those vulnerable identities, so that you'll still be able to enjoy your rights as much as people who do not have these vulnerable identities do. And that is not, it's not just, why are they getting more protections than normal people, quote unquote normal people. It's really not that. It's really more of helping them, like it's leveling the playing field, helping the people with vulnerable social identities to also enjoy their rights as a person with none of these vulnerable identities do. So yun siya. And if the state and non-state actors are not able to do what they need to do in order to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights owners' rights, then it is just rational and justifiable to hold them accountable. Accountability is the process whereby governments, public service organizations, and non-state actors and the individuals within them are held responsible for the decisions and actions, including the stewardship of public funds, fairness, and all aspects of performance in accordance with agreed rules, contracts, and standards, and fair and accurate reporting on performance results vis-a-vis mandated roles and plans. So you can just, I really don't have to articulate them here, but when you look at the things that are happening in the past few years, you know, about the extent to which seemingly despite all our calls for accountability and marami pa rin ang hindi nagiging transparent sa atin, ano? A lot of things that we ought to know about the fulfillment of our rights is still kept, is still not given to us, and we're not fully informed. Now, international bodies can hold certain institutions accountable, like the International Human Rights Council and treaty monitoring bodies, kasama na doon yung International Criminal Court, which of course we know that it's making a move towards certain personalities in our country. But also, we have to make sure that we have frameworks to ensure the accountability of state and non-state actors to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights through constitutional and legislative frameworks. You know, we have constitutional articles that, you know, really uphold human rights. We have legislative frameworks, and we have institutions, you know, that are supposed to be the check and balance in order to see whether or not state and non-state actors are respecting, fulfilling, and protecting their rights. No? And then, of course, we have institutions like governments, judiciary, the public administration, HR institutions, in private sectors, the vibrant civil society, non-organizational groups, and then, of course, through policies, procedures, and processes, in local in private organization, there should be a grievance process for this. For those na yung kanilang rights sa work ay hindi na susunod, and then rights for discrimination dapat meron din. So these are ways that we can ensure that the accountability of duty bearers, in terms of respecting, fulfilling, and protecting the rights of rights owners. And of course, we talk about the different levels of accountability, very much related to the previously discussed ones. There's an accountability of the government or state party, that are currently ruling and overseeing that the rights is supposed to be enjoyed by the people in the state. The accountability of the UN in general, and then the accountability of individuals, service providers, teachers, religious leaders. All of us are also accountable for the rights of other people, and the term my right ends when I step on other people's rights is never truer. But of course, it's not that, like, hindi lang siya yung ganun ka simple na broad brush na, my rights end when somebody else's rights begins. There's a reflective process behind it that happens. But basically, we should not contribute to the interference of enjoyment of human rights of other people. There are the ethical frameworks to which we work as future professionals, as persons in our society, as citizens in our society, obliges us also to be duty bearers to the rights owners that we meet every day and that we live with every day. So in conclusion, because human rights-based approaches aims to promote and protect rights, reduce inequality, and harness the substantive participation of those who are most affected, it is by definition sensitive to issues of culture and gender, especially that the first articles of Human Rights Declaration and ensures or promises that rights must be indiscriminately enjoyed by everyone, regardless of cultural background, regardless of gender and SOGI identity. Understanding human rights law and the UN human rights system is essential to the implementation of HRBA because it cannot be just culturally sensitive, it cannot be just gender mainstreamed, but we also have to understand that in creating our programs, in creating our advocacy, we should respect, protect, and fulfill human rights in our programs, advocacies, policies, activities, etc. Even though that those programs or activities are initiated by an individual, by you, by a group of students, kayo, by professionals, by a community, by the local government unit, or the state. So in this video, we were able to talk about human rights-based approaches in terms of developing programs, activities, promotions, policies, activities, advocacies, and how it's intricately linked with gender mainstreaming and cultural sensitivity. We also talk about the basic concepts of human rights, and then we also talked about how state and non-state actors are obligated to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights. And then also ways that we can hold state and non-state actors accountable to the enjoyment of our rights.